You wanted a deep dive on this Hunter Biden pardon, and wow, there's a lot to unpack here. Feels like something out of a political thriller.
Right? It certainly has the elements. Yeah, we've got power, family secrets, alleged corruption, and a pardon that seems to wipe the slate clean for a decade. It's a lot to unpack.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're approaching this deep dive like the muckrakers of old. You know, those journalists who weren't afraid to dig deep and expose the dark underbelly of power.
Exactly. We're not just looking at the legalities here. We're trying to understand the implications of this, the allegations surrounding Hunter Biden, and what it all says about those in power.
So, starting with the pardon itself, what struck me right away was the sheer scope of it. This document covers January 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2024. A full 10 years. Is that normal?
Not at all. Most pardons are very specific, addressing a particular crime or conviction. This one is what we call a blanket pardon, which is incredibly unusual. It essentially gives Hunter Biden a get-out-of-jail-free card for anything he might have done within that time frame.
And it's full and unconditional. What does that mean for someone like you or me if we were in Hunter's shoes?
It means no strings attached, no consequences. Imagine this. Even if there were charges or convictions we didn't know about, they'd be wiped clean, gone.
Wow. So what exactly is covered under this pardon? Let's get into the specifics of Hunter Biden's legal troubles. I know there were tax crimes, but I have to admit the details are a little fuzzy.
He pleaded guilty to federal tax evasion, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are also the gun charges specifically related to a false statement he made when purchasing a firearm.
Here's where it gets interesting for me. Is it common to see felony charges for something like that? I mean, for the average person, wouldn't that usually be a misdemeanor or something?
You're right to question that. While it's not unheard of, felony charges for this type of offense are definitely not the norm. It raises questions about whether Hunter Biden was treated differently because of who his father is.
So we're already wading into those selective prosecution waters. But then we have the business dealings. This is where things get really murky and honestly a bit suspicious.
Yes, this is where the international intrigue comes in. We're talking about Hunter Biden's involvement with Burisma in Ukraine, business ventures in China, and allegations of influence peddling and potentially even acting as an unregistered foreign agent.
Okay, stop right there. For those of us who aren't experts in international espionage, what do influence peddling and unregistered foreign agent actually mean? Because that sounds serious.
Influence peddling essentially means using your connections to powerful people for personal gain, often in exchange for money or favors.
So like allegedly using your dad's position as vice president to land lucrative business deals.
That's the allegation, yes. And an unregistered foreign agent is someone working on behalf of a foreign government or entity without disclosing that relationship to the U.S. government. That's a major legal no-no.
It feels like we're going way beyond simple tax issues here. And this is before we even factor in the infamous laptop from hell, right? There are rumors of drug offenses, financial crimes, and who knows what else lurking in there.
Right, and let's not forget the 10% for the big guy allegations. This is where things get really interesting.
Hold on, what is that all about? And how does it tie into this pardon?
Essentially, it's an allegation that Hunter Biden was involved in a scheme where 10% of the profits from his business dealings were funneled to someone referred to as the big guy. Some believe this big guy is Joe Biden himself.
If that's true, wouldn't that mean President Biden directly benefited from his son's potentially corrupt activities? That's huge.
It would be a major bombshell. It shifts the focus from potential conflicts of interest to potentially criminal activity, even bribery. But as of right now, it's just an allegation.
Okay, so we've got a lot to unpack here. We have this massive web of potential crimes, all seemingly swept under the rug by this incredibly broad pardon. But President Biden didn't just pardon his son and stay silent, right? He made a whole statement about it.
He did. And that statement itself is fascinating. It's crucial to understand his justification for this pardon if you want to get to the bottom of this.
I'm all ears. Let's break down his reasoning and see if it holds up under scrutiny.
All right. He claims Hunter Biden was a victim of selective prosecution, that the charges against him were politically motivated. He also suggests the initial plea deal, which might have kept all this quiet, fell apart because of political pressure from his opponents.
Interesting. He also got pretty emotional talking about how all this was an attempt to break Hunter and to break him as well. That's a strong play for sympathy.
It is. It makes you wonder, is this genuine concern from a father protecting his son or a calculated move to distract from potentially serious wrongdoing?
And then there's that line that's been replayed everywhere. Just tell the American people the truth. They'll be fair-minded. It almost feels like he's daring us to question whether he's being truthful himself.
Absolutely. And that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating from a muckraking perspective. We're left wondering, is there more to this story than meets the eye? Has the president been fully transparent?
It's a bit like those classic film noir mysteries, where everyone seems to have something to hide, and the stakes are incredibly high. This isn't just a family drama. It's about the potential abuse of power at the highest levels of government.
You've hit the nail on the head. This situation raises fundamental questions about fairness, accountability, and whether justice is truly blind in this country. It makes you wonder if this is how the powerful operate. What does that mean for the rest of us? It does make you think. And that's why this deep dive is so important. We're not just here to gossip about political families. We're trying to grapple with issues that strike at the very heart of our democracy. Like, is there equal justice under the law, or does it all depend on who you know?
Okay, so let's dig deeper into those issues you mentioned, starting with the claim of selective prosecution. To prove that, you'd need to show that Hunter Biden was treated differently than others who committed similar offenses, right?
Precisely. And that's where things get tricky. It's hard to find exact parallels, especially when you consider the unique circumstances surrounding Hunter Biden's case.
So where do we even begin to look for comparable cases? I mean, we have tax evasion, false statements on a gun form, and then this whole web of international business dealings. It's a lot.
We have to look at general prosecution trends. For instance, the Taxpayer Advocate Service, an independent organization within the IRS, has actually criticized the agency for focusing on low-income taxpayers, while often giving those with more complex finances who might be evading more taxes a pass.
So is it possible that Hunter Biden, with his complex business dealings, actually benefited from this system? It seems counterintuitive.
It's a possibility worth considering. But we also can't ignore the political aspect. He's the son of a sitting president. That kind of scrutiny brings a unique set of pressures and potential biases.
Which could cut both ways, right? It could make him a target for prosecutors wanting to make a name for themselves, or it could lead to leniency because no one wants to be seen as going after the president's son.
Exactly. It's a complex equation with no easy answers. There's evidence that could support both selective leniency and political motivated prosecution. It's up to each of us to weigh those factors and decide what we believe.
Honestly, it feels like we're falling down a rabbit hole here. Every piece of information seems to lead to more questions and contradictions.
That's the nature of muckraking, shining a light into those murky corners where things aren't always as they seem.
And in this case, what we seem to be uncovering is a system that might be vulnerable to both favoritism and political manipulation. It's unsettling.
It is. It makes you question the fairness of the system itself.
Okay, so we've talked about the pardon itself, President Biden's justification, and the idea of selective prosecution. But what about the actual allegations of corruption and influence peddling?
Yeah.
That's the big elephant in the room, right?
Right. Even if we entertain the possibility that Hunter Biden was targeted unfairly, it doesn't erase the possibility that he engaged in some shady business practices. And the pardon, by covering such a wide range of potential offenses, doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
It almost feels like the pardon itself is an admission of guilt, even though it's meant to protect him.
It's a tricky situation. The pardon doesn't exonerate him, it just shields him from prosecution.
Yeah.
And that raises a whole new set of concerns.
Because if he did use his father's position for personal gain, then this pardon becomes less about justice and more about a cover-up.
It could be seen as a way to silence criticism and prevent further investigation into potentially damaging or even incriminating activities.
Which brings us back to our muckraking mission.
Yeah.
Holding the powerful accountable, even when they try to hide behind legal maneuvering.
Exactly. We need to keep digging, keep asking the tough questions, and keep the pressure on.
Because there's a lot more to uncover here. This feels like just the tip of the iceberg.
You're right. So let's shift our focus to those corruption allegations. What evidence is there? What are the implications, not just for Hunter Biden, but for his father's presidency?
Okay, let's dive into that. This is where things could get really explosive.
Indeed. We're entering some potentially dangerous territory here.
All right, I'm ready. Lead the way. All right, let's get into those corruption allegations. We've got Burisma, this Ukrainian energy company, and then some questionable dealings in China. Where do we even start with all of this?
The Burisma situation is definitely a good place to start. Hunter Biden joined their board of directors in 2014 while his father was vice president and deeply involved in U.S. policy towards Ukraine.
And that's where the red flags go up for me. It just seems like a blatant conflict of interest, doesn't it? Was Hunter Biden really chosen for his expertise in energy? Or was it because of his last name and the access to power that came with it?
It's a question that deserves scrutiny. There have been a lot of questions about Hunter Biden's qualifications for that position, but so far there's no smoking gun, no clear evidence of a quid pro quo,
Oh, no.
a direct exchange of favors for political influence.
But even the appearance of a conflict of interest is damaging, isn't it? It makes people lose trust and feeds into this idea that the elite operate by a different set of rules.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
that's why this whole thing became such a political weapon. President Biden's opponents have used it to accuse him of using his position to enrich his son.
And then you add in the 10% for the big guy allegations, and it takes it to a whole other level. If that's true, it implies that Joe Biden was financially benefiting from his son's potentially shady dealings.
Exactly. It would change the whole narrative. Suddenly, we're not just talking about the appearance of a conflict of interest, but potential criminal activity, possibly even bribery.
But is there any hard evidence to back up those allegations, or is it all just hearsay and speculation?
That's where things get a bit blurry. There are emails and witness testimonies that suggest some kind of financial arrangement that might involve Joe Biden, but nothing concrete.
So a lot of smoke, but no fire, at least not yet.
Right.
But as they say, where there's smoke, there's usually fire, right?
That's often the case. And this pardon makes it even more difficult to get to the truth. It effectively shuts down any further investigation into these matters, at least on the federal level.
So in a way, the pardon is a shield. It protects Hunter Biden, and by extension, his father, from any legal consequences. But it doesn't erase the questions or the suspicion that something is being hidden.
It's the double-edged sword of pardons. They provide legal protection, but often come at the expense of public trust.
And in this case, that loss of trust could have a huge impact. It undermines faith in the justice system, weakens President Biden's leadership, and further divides an already polarized nation.
This whole situation speaks to the core of what muckraking is all about. It's about holding those in power accountable, demanding transparency, and exposing potential corruption no matter how uncomfortable it might be.
I think a lot of people listening right now are probably feeling that discomfort. I know I am. This whole pardon raises some serious questions about power privilege and whether justice is truly blind. It's hard not to wonder if someone without the last name Biden were in this situation, would they receive the same treatment?
It's a valid question, and it's one that we as citizens have a responsibility to keep asking. This isn't just about one family or one political party. It's about the integrity of our institutions and the very foundation of our democracy.
We started this deep dive by saying it felt like a political thriller. And as we peel back the layers, it becomes clear that this story is far from over.
We've only scratched the surface here, but hopefully this deep dive has given you some food for thought and maybe even sparked some outrage. Keep asking those tough questions, keep demanding accountability, and remember, the truth has a way of coming out eventually.
That's a good note to end on. Thanks for diving deep with me today. And to all of you listening, stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid to make some noise.